I need a cleric!
Ricky, you're not thinking about this. Clerics have to talk to the Paladin, so I take you to a temple, they'll come after us. You're seeing a druid!
A druid? I need a cleric, not a goddamn animal doctor!
You're seeing a druid! This is your fault! You're the one who fed halfling weed to the direwolf!
I feed the direwolf halfling weed!
You fed the direwolf halfling weed!
Fuck!
You're seeing a druid!
Fuck!
To another episode of Unqualified Experts. I am your corrupt overlord, Shane.
And I'm Braden Gardner, the other host.
And this is the point where we would usually tell you what the video is about, but we're pretty sure you're on board the train at this point. So, let's imagine D&D if we are playing Trailer Park Boys as D&D characters. I have been waiting for this moment.
We both have for a while, because we had this idea a few weeks ago, and we were both super excited to put it together.
And campaign-wise, we've had the idea for about half a year. We're just not sure which DM we want to torture with it yet.
We'll get our shot.
Yep.
I'm not too worried about that.
So for those of you who are fans of Trailer Park Boys, we're sure you're about as excited for this as we are. If you are not, that is definitely a show you should watch. Canadian humor at its best. And make sure the kids are not only not in the room, but not in the house.
For sure.
It's,
A
lot of swearing, a lot of adult situations.
It's kind of hard to describe Trailer Park Boys until you've actually seen a few episodes.
There's a reason it has a worldwide cult following. So with that, obviously, those of you who watch the show, Braden was doing a fantastic job playing Ricky, and I was playing Julian. So what would these two interesting individuals look like as D&D characters? Fortunately for you, we now have the answers.
Indeed. We're going to do a breakdown of class, alignment, and roleplay for both Ricky and Julian today. And we'll talk a little bit about some other options that you can use to spice up the gameplay a little bit and season it a little bit to your tastes. Because there are a lot of different ways you can go about playing Ricky or Julian, depending upon which pieces of their personality you want to highlight.
And that was kind of one of the fun things about preparing this topic was... At first glance, you would think it would be pretty straightforward, and it really isn't. These characters do have a surprising amount of nuance, which is kind of doubly surprising if you're a fan of the show, but when you really pay attention, there's a lot to dig into, so let's do this.
All right, well, why don't you go ahead and start by telling us a little bit about where you would see Julian if you were to pick a D&D class. And for the purposes of this video, we're using the Core Player's Handbook for D&D 5th edition.
Yep. Okay, and Julian, right off the bat, there are certain traits we're looking for. He is the strong guy, he is the weightlifter, so we know we're looking for a class where strength is going to be one of the major stats. It's just, Julian's a tough guy. We all know this from season 1 on. So that's one there. He is definitely going to have more wisdom out of the two. Although the plans still fall apart, so whether you say, okay, it's a 16, where you get to show some wisdom, but then you also give yourself some room to fail, or you decide to just simply roleplay the failures, well, that's an interesting option. It's kind of up to you on how you want to design that. Kind of going with that, as far as dump stats, ironically, charisma might be one of them for Julian, because when push comes to shove, he does not know how to deal with police or paladins the way that Ricky does. But at the same time, he's got a little bit of wisdom, but he doesn't have intelligence. So it's another place where, depending on how you interpret those two, that could be kind of a dumb stat. But he is pretty good in the fight. As for how does this actually translate to classes, I think it's safe to say, in some respect, they're both rogues. They are thieves.
For sure.
They have no issue seeing what's yours and taking it for theirs. They're not very good rogues, and that's what kind of makes it interesting, because that means you get to look at either going to other classes, or simply a good role-playing way of dealing with this is you don't make them rogues. They are the fighter or the other character who is trying to play a rogue, and that's why everything keeps going wrong. For Julian, fighter makes a lot of sense. He is big, He is strong. As Season 1 of Trailer Park Boys shows with Cyrus, he has no issue with picking a fight. He has no issue with going up against anyone, whether it's law enforcement, whether it's people moving in his territory, whether it's defending people he cares about. He's a bit paranoid, which kind of naturally ties into the fighter side. He's brawny. He'll have that strength. He can use a bunch of weapons. It's just one of those things that just kind of makes sense. It is an obvious choice. One that's less obvious, but I think is actually more interesting, he's a paladin.
Really?
You think about it, you still have that strength, you still have that power, that ability to move, but when you think about the character in the show, he definitely has a moral code or code of ethics he stands by. Now, does that code coincide with what is legal? No. It would not be that much fun if it did, but if you think about it, those people in Sunnyvale, which, name of the trailer park, makes a good D&D setting right there.
True.
Sunnyvale, those are his people or his family. He loves them. The grandmother in Season 1 from which we borrowed our sketch. Not really his grandmother, but she needs comfort, she needs company, he's there. She is extended family. The people in the trailer park are extended family. Ricky, who has caused him no end to misery throughout his life and all the many, many episodes of the show. You know what? He's still his friend, and when push comes to shove, he comes back. You can even look at another episode where Ricky's going to jail because he's in the middle of his wedding. Julian shoots the gun in the air, throws away the girlfriend, the freedom, because he knows his friend can't survive without him in prison. So there's definitely a code of ethics. It is not your conventional, I'm a paladin who serves this god. But there's that really interesting code where if his code is protecting those around him, that plays very, very much into an honor system that allows him to be weirdly chaotic in a way, or seem like it, but underneath there is those personal honor code that he is going to follow. And so I think you absolutely could do a fighter or a paladin or a combination of the two with Julian.
Yeah, I could see that. And if you do elect to go the paladin route, I know you'd mentioned that charisma might be a dump stat for Julian, but by the same token, he does know how to work a room. He just doesn't have the raw charisma that Ricky does.
And I'll say as a system thing, depending on how open your GM is to homebrewing, this is one of those places where in 5e D&D, I mean, you have feats, but if you could have a negative feature, like, hey, I'm going to have an 18 charisma for Julian, but give me a -5 with law enforcement, it would work perfectly. And I don't know many DMs, at least in our group, who mind giving you that extra flaw if you're asking for it. They are more than game to deal with your shenanigans that way.
Absolutely. Well, Julian does have kind of his own code and is more lawful, and Ricky couldn't be farther from the law if he tried. If you're playing a Ricky character, you're playing chaotic. At best, you might be able to argue for a neutral alignment, but you're definitely playing chaotic, and then whether you're good or neutral on the good-evil spectrum, that can be up to interpretation, because Ricky can be pretty selfish.
Yeah.
And along that same vein, much like Julian, Ricky's a big guy. He's pretty strong. He's not afraid to get into a fight. So as far as base stats are concerned, strength's going to be a good one. Charisma, I think, has to be a really good one for him as well. Just because of the core group of the Trailer Park Boys, he's the one who's most consistently in relationships. He's the one who's most consistently sweet-talking his way out of trouble with his family, with the law, with his daughter. He's basically employing charisma pretty much all the time. Yeah,
it's just the fact that his intelligence is so low, the charisma can only take him so far.
Yeah, and a lot of that stems from the fact that Ricky's not well educated. You could easily justify throwing a 6 in his intelligence. Yeah. But you can also have him care about education, so it might be throughout the course of the campaign you might buff your int by a point or two. It just kind of depends. As far as classes go, as Shane mentioned before, Rogue is a really good choice. Ricky's plots in particular tend to be extremely brazen, So you're not going to be playing a stealthy version of the rogue here.
Yeah, this is more of the smash and grab traditional rogue in that case.
And if you're playing high charisma, this can work well with intimidation, as well as persuasion, deception. These are all Ricky's wheelhouse. Just don't ask him to be stealthy, because he'd rather shoot a gun or get into a fight when somebody does something that gets in the way of where he's trying to go than rationally think it through.
And style-wise, you can definitely play a rogue that way. He acts like an idiot anytime you're going to break in or steal something, but hey, the moment anyone shows up, you just pour on that charisma.
Absolutely. But if you really want to play up the fight first and ask questions later angle, Julian, being more lawful, fighter's a good pick. Ricky, by contrast, you could kind of have to go barbarian to take advantage of the barbarian rage. It's a perfect excuse to basically shoot first and ask questions later.
He showed up and he was just loosing 6 crossbow bolts into the bystanders.
Pretty much. And, if you have gnomes feature prominently in the campaign, you could have him get access to firearms. That would be completely viable. Or if not, crossbows or regular bows are both totally viable choices here. However, of all the D&D classes, I think the one that best encompasses Ricky's personality overall has to be the Ranger.
Yeah.
Rangers, much as the class name suggests, have an affinity for ranged weapons, which are Ricky's preferred weapon of choice. He's not necessarily a brawler, although he can. You always see him with different variations of guns, bringing guns into all sorts of different situations where they usually aren't warranted. And he also has kind of an odd affinity for animals, particularly woodland creatures like raccoons that get into the house or trailer. Raycons.
Raycons.
And since the ranger has the ability to get an animal companion, that works really well for you, because you can have a Raycon tag along with you. And you also get all the benefits of being a ranged fighter. You can still be chaotic. You can also build in various of the D&D backgrounds, like Outlander or Hermit, and put together a really solid character that encompasses a lot of what you see in Ricky's personality across the early parts of the Trailer Park Boys series.
Plus, he has no problem with not sleeping in the house.
Absolutely. He's frequently homeless. He's frequently sleeping in whatever shelter he can find.
Well, and I love the fact that you're using Barbarian's rage in a detrimental way, and you just don't see that in D&D. Because, okay, here's a plan, stuff's going along, and as a DM, that'd be a blast for me if it's like, okay, I'll have you roll a dice to see if you go into a rage or not. And that can set off all kinds of side adventures that just make D&D campaigns the best.
And you might not even have to go the random route. If you're comfortable role-playing, you can just make that call and
just say, hey, I'm going into a rage because this is fucked.
And your party will roll their eyes and then try to bail you out of the situation that you're making.
Or walk away and watch the fireworks. Either way, it should be a show.
Absolutely. I mean, Ricky's been to jail a time or 6. I mean, it wouldn't be far-flung for the conflict to go sideways and for him to end up with the Paladins and the local constabulary. So, that kind of covers a lot of the best options for classes that we felt that the Core Player's Handbook could offer, but they're not the only ones by any stretch. Absolutely feel free to go your own route if you really want to play Ricky as, say, a druid, or if you want to have Julian take up a different class.
Well, in a lot of ways, multi-classing makes sense with these characters. If
True.
you really want to play close to the personality, you can easily see Julian being a fighter / paladin / rogue, or any combination thereof. You can make some arguments for some other things too. And same with Ricky. You can see that bit of barbarian / ranger completely, and trying to be a rogue, but he's using those intimidation stats because he's not sneaky.
For sure.
And yeah, you can make a couple of very interesting characters based on how they are portrayed in that show, and the role-playing is going to be a blast. But before we get to that part, first of all, yes, there's an obvious answer for which race you should be. We get they're humans in the show, but come on, we're not basic bitches. You guys expect better from us. We're going to deliver. I'll go first because I thought I had the perfect answer. And it wasn't bad, but it was not the best one. My thought was dwarves, and it made a lot of sense. Dwarves, whether they showed up in Norse Viking history, or J.R.R. Tolkien, or just 5e races, if you're thinking, okay, what is a race that they love their booze, they love to party, they don't mind adventuring into a lot of trouble when combining these things, dwarf just kind of jumps to mind. You have the mead halls, you have the gathering, they're kind of known as big beer drinkers, they're boisterous, but some of the traits I love about them is, and tell me if this sounds familiar, they're extremely loyal to their friends. They're extremely loyal to their community. You might not always understand why they act the way they do, but there is a certain honor code behind it. There is a reason for it. And you know what? The doing crazy schemes while partying in search of wealth, once again, it sounds like a party of dwarves going out into the world. And you could easily see two dwarf buddies maybe even being made fun of because yours has the goatee instead of the full beard while Ricky has the Elvis sideburns instead of a good dwarven beard. Maybe that's why they were a bit set apart from some of the others. And you could just roleplay that in. And it made a lot of sense. It gets you away from human. And then Braden had the perfect answer to one-up me on this, so I'm going to cede the floor to him.
So, don't get me wrong. Dwarves are a fantastic choice. Their affinity for booze, community, and all the best kinds of troublemaking make them an excellent answer for picking a race for who you want Julian and Ricky to be. But you gotta dig a little deeper. Ricky and Julian aren't strictly a two-man operation. They need that available yet disposable assistance in order to get some of the more menial tasks or more dangerous ones that are beneath them to take. So, honestly, the race that I see them being played as is Dragonborn.
Yeah.
And then having your Corey and Trevor basically be kobolds.
Yup.
As far as I'm concerned,
so good.
You could name all your kobolds Corey or Trevor.
They can even be disposable. One dies, another Corey or Trevor shows up again.
Exactly. Since kobolds in D&D, and especially in 5th edition, have a tendency to follow dragons where possible, it's not much of a stretch to get them to follow Dragonborn. And you can pick various options for what type of Dragonborn you want to be. Generally speaking, I'm limiting options more to the good aligned ones because, like we mentioned before, Ricky and Julian aren't evil, they're just misguided a lot of the time. So if you're going to be playing Dragonborn, generally speaking, you're probably going to be looking at more lawful options for Julian, which I believe were silver and bronze. And then for Ricky, you're looking at brass or copper.
Yeah, and I love the idea that Ricky, in the middle of failing a check on a barbarian rage, has a breath weapon to just make everything more chaotic.
Exactly. Or as far as that goes, Julian doing a hat trick with the glass of booze that he is traditionally seen carrying throughout the series.
Or the drinking horn in this particular case.
Absolutely. That little extra bit of fantasy seasoning to get everything meshed together real nicely.
Yeah, and I agree. Dragonborn makes so much sense once you go that way. You get your Corey and Trevor. I know as a DM, usually when someone tries to get an extra guide in there, you're kind of iffy because they're looking to min-max. If you're playing Ricky and Julian, you're not min-maxing. You are giving the DM yet another way to hilariously muck up your plans, because you could be rolling well and things could be going right, but you have two kobolds named Corey and Trevor, and anyone who's watched even 3 episodes into Season 1 knows how that's going to go.
Poorly.
Yes, very much so. And possibly really. And if you get a third kobold, you can just start calling him Jacob.
Yeah, you could do that too. It's not a bad little arrangement. So, we've got your character pretty well built at this point. And you've got your class, you got your race, you've got your alignment. So, let's talk about the real fun stuff now, the roleplay.
Oh god, yes. If you're loving this idea, it's because you cannot wait to see the look on a DM's face when two of you show up as Ricky and Julian from Trailer Park Boys. If they've never seen the show, they're going to have no idea what's going on, but the chaos is going to be amazing. If they've seen the show, you're going to get blamed for the DM's drinking problem, which is kind of fair at that point. And on theme. So
it's true.
So role-playing, this is absolutely a time. Do some research with your co-conspirator. And I will let you do a little bit of jumping in, because more of mine on the role-playing is kind of research, some side thoughts. So what are some of your thoughts on playing them in the campaign, in the sessions?
Okay, well, as far as playing them in the campaign, backstory, your two characters obviously go way back. They've known each other. They've got a shady past. As far as basic interactions, Julian is more of the schemer among the two. Yep. His plans are generally fairly complicated, but they can be logically step-by-step through to get from point A to point B, so long as elements C, D, and E don't screw things up in between. So
those often being called Ricky, Corey, and Trevor.
Yeah, I mean, not wrong.
And sometimes just making things overcomplicated.
Yeah, sometimes things are a little more complicated than they need to be. Sometimes there's an element where your plan hinges on dealing with someone whom you haven't met or don't know well, or them having a specific piece of gear. Any of that can be part of Julian's schemes. So that gives you some pretty good incentive right there to join up with a party who's looking to do something, whether it's go get treasure or do a delivery quest to a far-off kingdom. You're almost never going to be strictly aligned with what your party is doing. It's just a side benefit for what you're actually interested in doing.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of fun here where, as you're making a character backstory with whoever's being the other half of your duo, feel free to make up some stories based on the series, kind of give them that D&D flavor. So even when you're in session, hey, do you remember that one time where we found those cave trolls? Would they call themselves Sam? Man, that, and just, you have the shared experience between the characters of your backstory when they had to deal with a cave troll who just made unreasonable demands. You had to do a fetch quest for them and you got shot. Or, arguments over who fed weed to the direwolf.
I didn't feed the direwolf.
You fed the direwolf weed. And there can be a lot of fun with how you roleplay this. And I will say, make sure you break this with the right group. If you have a very dungeon crawl by the numbers group, this is not going to be the type of thing to break it on them. If you have a group that can roll with the punches, doesn't mind being creative, loves the role play, you could have an absolute gem of a time with this.
Absolutely. So, while Julian's more of the schemer, if you're playing Ricky, like we mentioned before, Ricky's not well educated.
Yeah.
Has not completed a basic education, though he gets ever closer as the series progresses. And it's important to him. It's something that he does genuinely value.
He does eventually get his grade 8.
Yeah. And you can easily play that up in dealing with the party. For a Werewolf the Apocalypse campaign that Ben ran for us a while back, I ended up playing a character that was heavily influenced by Ricky called Billy, who hated being called by his full name William, much as Ricky hates to be called Richard.
Yep.
And little things that I would do throughout the course of the campaign, I'd forget I had specific supernatural abilities that could have gotten me out of trouble. I would mispronounce words often in the course of speaking in-game.
And frankly, I was amazed you did that so consistently, because that is funny on TV. it looks way easier than it is. You need to be really sharp to stay on top of that consistently.
You've got to practice a little bit, and it's hard being the representative of a werewolf tribe when you'd rather just be at home growing weed with the Raycons. But it's so worth it, and it adds that extra little bit that makes the character come to life and is much more believable. Ricky's also a very linear thinker. Julian is very big picture. Ricky is little picture for the most part. He's very interested in getting from point A to point B and doesn't think about the random elements. He just bulldozes through as best he can.
And ramifications. He does not think of the ramifications.
At all.
Which, if you have someone in your party who's a rogue who's good at detecting traps, that could be a good way to create the comedy. At what point does the rogue say, go ahead. My strategy is to let him charge ahead and just see what happens. And, well, that could very much be the way that Julian's schemes start coming apart.
Absolutely, especially because a lot of times Julian's schemes come to pieces because Ricky gets shot, or Ricky gets poisoned, or Ricky overdoses, or something happens where Ricky, through completely avoidable obstacles, elects to bulldoze through, and hilarious consequences ensue.
Yeah, and it can be an absolute blast. And I think this is one where, to get the most out of the role-playing, you are going to spend a little bit more time in preparation, because you do want to prep with the other person. Okay, what are the little things we may argue about this time? But also, even though they bicker constantly, you can always tell on the show that they are friends at heart. They do care for each other at heart, even when they're absolutely blowing up at each other. And you want to make sure to catch that little element. You don't want to be just a straight-up argument all the time. The slapstick comes from the fact that they do care about each other, but they're going to screw it up again.
Exactly. But now we want to hear from you. What crazy character ideas have you tried to bring to life in D&D or elsewhere in the tabletop RPG universe? Do you have some suggestions for building on Ricky or Julian yourselves, or do you want to bring in some other Trailer Park Boys characters? Heck, do you want to see us go over other ones? Let us know in the comments below.
Yeah, we always like to hear what ideas you have, what other shows have caught your attention, and at that point, what are the crazy builds you want to see? And if you have a story about one, please, we want to see that paragraph in the comment section. And if you haven't already, like and subscribe, and until next time,
take it easy.
Take it easy. If you like what you just saw, please support us by hitting that like button and subscribing to our channel for more great gaming content.